Hello, listeners. Good evening or good morning, as it may be. How do you do? Welcome to this production of National Treasures Organization. We are trying to reflect on independence. We have a guest with us. Mr. Fitz-Allan Peters is with us, and many of us know him as Rush. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of our program. We want to chat with you a little bit about independence and the meaning of independence and how you see what is happening with Vincentians with regard to the case of independence and what goes on in St. Vincent. So, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Mr. Tibbers, and good day, everyone. I'm pleased to be on your program.
Well, thank you. The first thing I would like to do is ask you if you have any memories of that very first independence.
Well, to be truthful, I was a child at that time. I was very young in primary school. And for me, at that time, independence was not significant. I do not think that there was this level of consciousness in youths at the time regarding independence. So for me, it was more of a sort of a festive time for us, that week in school, and you more play and maybe looking at getting time off in a way, free time at school. So that is what might be most memorable for me as a child.
Okay.
I can briefly recall that leading up to that period, because my birthday was just a few months before, and the last sufferer and sufferer erupted. So that would be most of my recollection from 79.
From that period of time. Well, I suppose I'm a little bit older than you, and I do have some memories of things like the parade, like the fact that it was nighttime. But as we move forward, and as you have grown, what has your sense of being an independent country come to mean? How do you think that we have tried to manage the challenges that come with being an independent country?
Well, when we look at independence, if we look at it from our own movements, the colonial period and so forth, and the idea of a country relinquishing that link that they had with their colonial past, and then beginning to chart a course for themselves. So for me, independence has to do with the Vincentians having the opportunity to create an independent mindset, having to chart a path based on where we as Vincentians want to go, understanding what our limitations are, understanding what our fundamental rights and freedom are, how we are protected by the symbols of independence and so forth, and creating in the Vincentian a psyche that could defend our liberties, defend our freedom, and at the same time chart a path where we can have political as well as economic freedom. So independence has to do with us as a people, understanding who we are, understanding the road that we have traveled on to get here, the efforts of our founding fathers. We cannot forget the role of Chatoyer, the man who defended the city during the fierce colonial period. So for me, it has to do with resilience. It has to do with that pride in being that citizen of a country that took on the might of Europe and was able to defend that freedom for hundreds of years before it came under subjugation. So resilience, determination, pride, and these are the sort of things that I relate.
That you would relate to.
Our independence.
Right. Well, so we have a sense that there is a history, that the history has led us to a certain point. If we look now at what the life of the country is in 2022, and we say that there is a level of pride in being Vincentian, how then would you speak to some of the symbols and how we as citizens respond to these symbols?
Well, each country has symbols that it try to use to get citizens to show some sort of pride and some sort of patriotism, to show some sort of a national reverence, if one may use that phrase. And while we have a number of symbols in St. Vincent, and while these oftentimes are taught in the schools, I am not so sure that Vincentians are fully aware as to the importance of these symbols. They may recognize them. For example, persons may recognize the flag. Persons are aware of the national anthem and so forth. But to what extent do our people pay homage to these things? Let us use the anthem, for example. Oftentimes we attend events, maybe a cultural event at the park. It may be a sporting game or something of the sort, and so a sporting event, and the national anthem is being played. And time and again, I'm sure you can attest to this, that many persons refuse to stand at attention for the national anthem. And that too speaks to whether or not that Vincentians have pride for these symbols. So while these symbols are there, many persons do not recognize them in the way that they should be recognized.
Mm-hmm.
And that too could be based on the fact that a lot of these symbols are not readily visible within our society.
Well, certainly our flag and certainly our anthem. Most of when you walk around, there are flags flying. In many cases, when we have any kind of official activity, the anthem is played. Now, the reaction to the anthem, the reaction to the flag, it might have something to do with the differentiation between the recognition of the state and the country versus the recognition of the politics that plays within that situation. But having raised the question of these symbols, how about other symbols which we have? Very frequently, I understand that our citizens have to travel for various representations, and they're asked about the national dress of the country. And there is still a certain amount of uncertainty with regard to that. When we talk about food and we're trying to make a presentation at some international food competition, what do we use as the food that represents St. Vincent? So I suppose there are many things that we could look at with regard to the symbols and how the citizens respond to them. But I have to remember that we are in a time constraint. So let's see if we can move on to the very meat of our discussion and ask the question, in 2022, what does independence mean for our citizens?
Well, looking at things in our modern setting, independence would naturally speak to whether or not our citizens are able to exercise their fundamental rights and freedom, whether they are able to participate actively in the democratic ideals of the country, whether or not they have opportunities to earn an economic livelihood. So independence in 2022 should speak to a sort of consciousness within the citizens of the country, a sort of a deepening of this consciousness that citizens know what their roles are, how they are critical to the development of the country, how their participation in the efforts to build a stronger St. Vincent is critical, and it's very, 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 very important. So for in 2022, the context of independence has to be built within not only individual liberty, but in collective responsibility, as we try to chart a path forward for a nation that started out with limited, and I don't want to just say resources, but basically with empty pockets. And to do that, we have to now bring all of our people on board in this sort of a deepened consciousness, that if this consciousness is deepened and we have this collective responsibility, then the rule of law will stand, because Vincentians will know, okay, that we can stand for something. Because we have been a resilient people. Our history has shown that we have been very resilient. The efforts of the Kalinagos and the Garifunas, the efforts of the struggles of Macintosh, the struggles of Ebenezer Joshua. So for in this time, independence must speak to our deepened consciousness, a better understanding of where we are coming from, where we are, and the road that we are going to use to build economic freedom, to build like what we call like food sustainability, to build an education system that is fully decolonized, to build a judicial prudence that basically that we delink from our colonial past. These sort of things must be part and parcel of our new St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Okay, then we are essentially saying that the citizen needs to look beyond themselves and look into what is the collective of the country.
Definitely. And just before you move on, and that collective responsibility must supersede all partisan aspects. Because what we are seeing here now is that our consciousness, I can recall as a youngster growing up, that St. Vincent was always involved in some sort. In St. Vincent, we had debates, all sort of debates. We had civil society that was very vibrant. We are not seeing these kind of things. And we need that sort of vibrance in civil society to build that consciousness. We are seeing that consciousness waning. And we need to bring that back by rebuilding our civil society, incorporating the youths more as part of this. Again, we must link the education aspect to this, where youths must be taught about our symbols and the significance of these symbols. We must look at our economic thrust, how we are going to at least delink, as I say, from the colonial economic practices of just FDI and basically looking to foreign entities. So we have to now begin to look within ourselves, begin to look at what we have that we can use for our creative development. So the people must become part and parcel of this building process. It must be centered around the people, that collective responsibility, that collective effort.
Which then leads us to speaking about education. How does education fit the young person to be a contributing, thinking member of the society, building this broad base and this broad response to living? That requires the young person to look beyond an education that simply teaches them how to earn a financial living. It needs to have them get involved with a thinking kind of living. And I would then turn to you and say to you, you are active as a teacher at this point. How can we help our young people change from just studying to pass an exam into studying so that they are making connections between the things they learn and the things that they can do with their life?
Okay, very, very interesting question, Mr. Theobalds. I'll address that in a simple way. We need our people need to be educated in a way that the education that they obtain is useful within the Vincentian society. It must not be just an education for certification or what has carried over from the colonial time in terms of where you try to train people for the job market. We have to move away from that, because what it looks like to me is that in such a system, we are basically looking at a production system. So you send them in and you're basically producing much of the same. What we want now is an education system that is, in a way, can be adapted to our own circumstances. So, for example, a society that our common resource being our people and our land, how can we now build an education system in which people can begin to say, how can we manipulate the land? How can we use the land, for example, and earn a living beyond just the fact of going to school, taking some subjects, going on to college or university, being certified, and then heading to the job market? We now have to look at an education system that is responsive to what our needs are. So we have to look at what our needs are and how we are going to address those needs. So the education system must be responsive. A classic scenario, the COVID virus, for example, is a clear indication of the extent to which the education system that we have is not really responsive to our needs. The moment classes were moved from the physical classroom to the online setting, everyone begins to cry down the absence of the teacher from the physical classroom. And the world has gone past that now. The world is more adaptable to the learning environment. And that is alone speaks to how our education system is still failing to a great extent, because it fails to adapt to the needs or the current needs of the society.
Okay. In which case, then some of what has to happen is for us to build more entrepreneurship into what you learn, so that
definitely. And just before you go on, I am of the view that every single child should be taught a skill in our schools. Every single child must be taught about how to earn a livelihood outside of becoming workers, becoming employees. The education system and our own business culture must begin to encourage creative projects, giving opportunities for persons to come up with ideas that can be adopted. For example, a person may not have the financial resources to invest in an idea that he has, but we must have a collective pool. For example, businessmen who are willing to say, okay, that's a lovely idea. We are going to pitch some money into this idea and bring it to fruition. And in that way, we begin to build a cadre of not only entrepreneurs, but we're also going to build a cadre of investors and persons now who are willing to broaden the scope of our country in terms of job creation. So we have to change our mindset. It must be one that is built on creativity.
Very well said. Before we wrap this up, we are looking at independence, and it's just a few days away in terms of when we're recording this. But what then would you say is the role of the parent or the guardian in the process of the education of our children, in the effort to raise youth who are more broadly educated than just the book learning?
And as you know, the home is a very important facet, where a child learns his first words and so forth, where a child gets his first bit of schooling, if one may say so. And to me, parents are significant in this regard. They too must have that ability to impart this knowledge about the freedoms and the rights of the citizen. But to do that, the parents themselves must be taught. So what we need now is basically the revival of civil society, in which these organizations can host events and offer opportunities for persons to be given the opportunity to learn about the significance of our symbols, the meaning of independence, their own role as a citizen. So if they learn that, then they can impart it. But what we have is that there is a failure in a way, or a weakness in our family structure. And because of that weakness now, we see that there is no great transfer of that level of patriotism and nationalism in that regard. So we have to rebuild civil society in which these things can be nurtured.
Well, I want to thank you very much for having been with us on this program, for sharing so fulsomely in regard to the things that we're trying to bring to our audience, that we're trying to help them to see. This program is coming to you through the courtesy of National Treasures. We are an organization whose concern is the safeguarding of the heritage of the country, especially the intangible heritage of the country. Mr. Peters has shared with us this evening about how important these intangible things are in the development of the civil society and in the development of rounded citizens who have a patriotic thinking kind of approach to their living. So we look forward to other occasions on which we may come to you and share with you and help with the building of our country through these kinds of discussions and through having people look at what was, what is useful from what was, knowing our history so as to have a direction with our future. All of these types of things are part of what National Treasures seeks to accomplish in its work. We thank you for viewing with us. Have a good evening.